Hello and welcome back. What we were discussing was the genetic programming, in which we formulated a tool, we formulated a mechanism for problem solving in which we did not involve solutions to the problem, but rather than we involved programs. These programs were used to solve the problem, and we had some idea by which we know how well these programs solve the effective problem, based on which the fitness value can be assigned, and we can try to generate, we can try to evolve the optimal program out of all the many programs that one may imagine. We discussed the fundamentals were same as that of the genetic algorithms. We discussed how the evolution was carried out along with time, and of course we discussed that the fundamental operators of mutation, crossover and elide, they were with some modification applied to this new representation. What I had it as a tree-based representation. That is normally the case whenever I use genetic programming. And we will be continuing the same discussion, in which we would look into a bit more of the operators that are used in this kind of technique. Now, one of the operators of use is known as replication. Replication does nothing but it replicates a program. It replicates into two programs, and both the programs are exactly the same. So now one motivation would be, one question would rather be that why do I generate two similar programs, because they are only going to take additional computation time. They would be at exactly the same point in the fitness landscape. Why is it that I replicate my programs? Now what is important is that when we talk about genetic programming, there is a lot of activity in the population space which drastically changes different individuals. So if there is a program, if there is an individual having good characteristics, it is likely to get destroyed by some or the other means, and it is likely to go towards the negative side where the fitness value decreases. So in order to make best use of the features that this program has, we replicate this program so that two independent programs take their own evolutionary routes. So that two independent programs take their own evolution, and they evolve by their own mechanism, they evolve by their own means. And that is done when I use the replication operator. So here I try to replicate my program into two programs. So if there was a program over here, in the next generation I'll have exactly similar programs, and what I would be expecting that there would be some mutation operator applied over here, and there would be some different mutation operator applied over here. So very soon the likeness of these two programs is all gone. Very soon the likeness of these two programs is gone, where the mutation modifies both of them and both of them have different architecture. But what were the good characteristics of these programs is in some or the other ways retained by both these programs. So mutation has got a bigger playground to work with. It has got a bigger playground to work with. It can play around more with the existing kind of programs, with the existing trees, and it can formulate its own mechanism to optimally evolve the program that we would believe to be the optimal program right when the stopping criterion has been met. So that was about the replication. Sometimes we use in another program, another concept that is known as architecture altering. Now, prolonged exposure to genetic programming sometimes yields very fit individuals. It sometimes yields very good individuals that more or less are able to solve the problem in a good sense. But the problem that sometimes comes out to be is that programs do not possess a good architecture. Even by a very bad architecture, they may be able to solve the program. So as we have only taken some example, I say if 1 equals to 1, then some code over here, then some other code over here. Ideally, I can delete this part of the code, delete this, and straight away getting this. If I have it something like x plus 1, 1 plus 1, and again 1 plus 1, I can easily trim it down to something that says x plus 3. So these are the programs that unfortunately have a very bad architecture. Once we evolve the optimal program, we'll get some big hefty trees. We'll get in some very big hefty trees, and at that time when we deal with such hefty trees, we'll see that a large part of those trees is scrap. So it's unnecessary code, unwanted code, redundant code, and all these kinds of things. And of course we know that whenever the size of a genetic individual it increases, my complexity of search it increases. Whenever my program size would increase, it will be very difficult to handle it because of the large dimensionality of the search space. So these are the problems that these codes create. They are redundant, they give redundancy, they take redundancy in mutation and crossover, and that is where redundancy, bad codes, it all multiplies. Now even these codes are what is the result of some kind of bad mutation or crossover operations, that redundancy gets into these codes, that bad architecture gets into these codes. So there is some mechanism in which we would like that we can analyze these codes, we can improve the architecture, providing the same functionality in such a way that this code looks neater, and if this code looks neater, it transfers some neat characteristics to the other code which eventually also get neater. So it is very important that when I have a prolonged run of the genetic programming algorithm, I devise in some mechanism to control my architecture. I have some mechanism to control my architecture, and that is what sometimes solves the problem. Sometimes we also use some kind of repair operations, so that can probably be called as another genetic programming operator. If I run my genetic programming algorithm and I carry forward all the various operators that it had, it is likely that I generate infeasible solution, infeasible because of a wrong syntax or because of other constraints into the problem. If I have this kind of program that is not obeying some syntax or some kind of constraint specified, then I need to have some kind of repair operation in which I'll try to repair up the various things so that the new program that comes up follows all the constraints, it follows all the norms that were specified for the problem. It follows the syntax, it follows the grammar, it follows all the rules that my program ideally needs to follow, and then is when I get in good individuals that obey the constraints. Again, most of the discussion about the repair operator we have already seen when we were dealing with the genetic algorithm, and we had a complete discussion of how do we handle infeasible solution with these kinds of algorithms, and that entire discussion would more or less as it is repeat when we talk about the genetic programming. So the repair operator is again an operator for that sake. So like this, we've got numerous operators. We can design in other kinds of operators as well based on whatever are the specific requirements. Whatever are the requirements, we can design our own operators. So we've studied the crossover, we've studied the mutation, we've studied something called as elite, we had some replication, we had some architecture, altering techniques, and of course we had some kind of repair. So all these operators, they ultimately pilot into the main algorithm, and using all of them we are able to generate a higher generation of population from a low generation of population. And of course, because our selection is biased, this would more or less be fitter in nature as compared to the previous generation. Because we were more biased towards a fitter individual, our fitness value should normally increase. that again for the same concepts that we study in the genetic algorithm should mean my best individual should normally be improve along with time or at least stay constant because of the application of the elite operator. What we move on is the convergence. Now for a double vector representation in genetic algorithm, I had a nice fitness landscape that was drawn. Even in terms of a binary vector, I draw in a hypercube wherein I use some kind of schema theory to explain convergence. I use some kind of schema theory and explain how is it that the algorithm is ultimately converging towards the global minima and most probably trying to escape from all the various local optima possible. So how is it that my genetic programming algorithm, it optimizes my programs? How is it that convergence happens over here? We use the same schema theory to explain this. Now one thing is natural. There is one thing very natural, that I cannot draw a fitness landscape for this problem. My fitness landscape was drawn wherein I had a set of tunable parameters P1, P2, P3, or let's say C1, C2, C3 up to Cn, and based on all of them, I drew in an n+1 dimensional fitness landscape where the fitness was calculated for all combination of these parameters, and after drawing that, I showed that this is the point we want to reach, the global maxima in case of fitness landscape. In case of coarse landscape, it will be the global minima. That is what I ultimately aimed to achieve. But in a program, there is nothing called as a tunable parameter, so we can never define that. We can never define a tunable parameter, and if we cannot define that, we cannot draw that beautiful fitness landscape. So what do? I use a schema theory to explain how this convergence happens. Now the discussion is quite the same as the schema theory in binary, in a binary representation of individual in a genetic algorithm, in a binary bit string representation of genetic algorithm. I use more or less the same terms and terminology. So I would use the term star into a schema. Now because it's a schema theory, there is a schema that represents in general all the individuals of that population. It represents all the individuals of that population, so there will be a schema. My schema will show in some nodes, some leaf nodes, some non-leaf nodes, and some star. A leaf node will be stored at any leaf if all the individuals in that population have got exactly the same leaf node, as was the case with zeros and ones in the bit string representation, and they will store some non-leaf node if exactly all of them have got the same non-leaf node stored at the respective position. And if even one of the individual does not have that leaf node or that non-leaf node, even if one individual does not have those characteristics, it does not have those leaf nodes at the same position and those non-leaf nodes at the same position, we store a star. A star denotes that multiple individuals of this population have got multiple entries out at that position in which I am using the word star. Multiple individuals have gotten multiple things specified, multiple nodes at the position specified in which I am storing the star. So initially my population is all random in nature, so my schema is nothing but a star. It's nothing but a star, it's all random individual. So I do not know what is my tree exactly, so I represent it as a star, and that is all that I can be assured of. That is all that I can be assured of, that anything is possible right now, because my population is randomly generated. It contains multiple sizes, it contains multiple leaves, it contains multiple non-leaves, all individuals having their own architecture. But afterwards what happened is that the bad architectures, they are all gone. because of the survival of the fittest Darwinian principle, they are all gone, and only the fit architectures, they survive. And they not only survive, these fit architectures replicate their characteristics. These fitter individuals, they replicate their characteristics so that more and more good characteristics are induced into the population pool, and lesser unfit characteristics exist. So afterwards what happens is that more individuals have the fitter characteristics and lesser ones of them have got the unfit characteristics. So as a result, after some 3, 4 or 5 generations, my tree becomes something like this. So this means that all the individuals inside the population, when I am representing this as a schema, had A as the root node. So there was an A that was there as a root node, and it had got exactly 2 children. There was an A as a root node, and it had exactly 2 children. Now the number of children may again be from the syntax of the tree, or the syntax for the applicable for the root node A. But it had all the individuals inside my population had exactly this as a schema, had exactly this as a general architecture. All of them had got A as a root node and some different nodes thereafter. So I can have individuals being of this format and so on. I can have individuals like this and something on over here, and let's say C again over here. So anything of this is possible. All these were different kinds of individuals, but this was a general architecture where all of them had A and 2 children. This would be my first individual, this would be my second individual, like this I'll have some 100 individuals and so on. All of them will have A as their root nodes if I am denoting this as my schema. I move on further towards the 15th, the 20th or 25th generations. I get this as the architecture. Now this is the definite part of the schema. This is what is the definite part of the schema that has already been sought out. And this is about which I am not going. So this schema means that all the individuals in the population have A, the right child was B, the left child showed different characteristics, so I will not write it down over here, and B, the left child was C. Again, more or less this schema from star over here to A over here to ABC over here, it would evolve in this mechanism only because if I replace this C by something else, there would be a sharp reduction in the fitness value. If I replace this B by something else, there will be a sharp reduction. Or if I change this architecture by something else, there would be a sharp reduction. So these were positions very easy to optimize. The ease of optimality was very high, and as a result they got easily optimized. Once I reach even further, I'll have something like A over here, let's say D over here, a E over here, a star over here, a B over here, a C over here, a F over here, a G over here, and something like a star over here and star over here, and so on. This will keep on repeating. So here the definite part would be something like this. This is what has already been optimized. So if I go on, I'll keep on having in trees, I'll keep on having in programs that have got structured root nodes, the leaf, some of the non-leaf nodes, some of the leaf nodes that have got all structured leaf nodes, and the other parts of it is that they could not converge, they are still being optimized. They are still being optimized by the algorithm. So as a result, what happens is that the definite part that goes along with time, the part that is already known, it grows along with time, and as a result that it grows along with time, I keep on getting converged. I keep on getting converged. When I did not have this root node fixed, there was abundant of options that were possible for this program to grow. But when I fixed all these, there is a considerably less amount that I can do, because the height of the tree is more or less always controlled. More or less the height of the tree is always controlled. So I keep on getting converged and converged along with time, where all the individuals in the population, they ultimately towards the end revolve around almost the same architecture. They revolve almost around the same architecture of this program, and if I change anything over here, things change. If I change anything over here, things somehow considerably change. And as a result, what happens is the fitness value would decrease if I change anything over here, and the individual may ultimately die out with time. So like this, the convergence, the tree keeps on getting converged, where more and more definite parts are added. It keeps on going along with time, where all individuals have the same characteristics over these definite regions, and towards the end they all converge to the same architecture, that is the optimal architecture that I was trying to evolve. The evolved program is the optimal program when it comes to solving the kind of problem that I had in hand. So this was very more or less again repeating the same fundamentals of the genetic algorithm. This was what we studied as the convergence using the schema theory applicable for the genetic programming individuals. We'll continue the discussion. Now whenever we write programs, we know that there are some very big problems, but they can be solved rather easily. We know that there are some very big problems, but all these problems can be solved rather easily along with time. And when I say that these problems can be solved rather easily, it means that they have some small codes which solve these problems. So even small programs are able to solve rather complex problems. The real life problems that we give to these systems of genetic programming are not that hard. They are not that hard. So there is a motivation that there exist some small and sweet programs. There exist some small and sweet programs that are able to solve any problem that we give to the genetic programming. The only thing is that the small and the sweet programs need to be written decently. They need to be written decently, so there would be a less amount of redundancy, there would be a less amount of useless code, and all of those things, if we get rid of them, there would be some small programs that would be able to solve a problem, because there is no limit to complexity. The same number 5, I can write it down as 1 plus 4, this is the smallest. This is slightly more complex, I can write down as 1 plus 1 up to 1. This is slightly more complex, it would become very complex if I write it down like this. So there is no limit to complexity, but what we are supposed to believe is that even small programs can solve problems effectively. Even small programs can solve problems effectively. So as a result, what do I do is that I restrict my algorithms from taking in too complex shapes. I have to restrict my algorithm from taking in too complex shapes, and that is what is known as a code length control. That is what is known as a code length control when we talk about these algorithms. Another motivation for controlling the code length is that if my code length becomes very large, so there is a highly complex tree that ultimately comes up. So there will be abundance of nodes over here, after which it is very difficult to apply the crossover, the mutation and all these operators. There is a hell lot that I can do out with a very large tree. There is a hell lot that I can do with a very large tree, and that is where my schema it rises drastically, my search space rises drastically, and that is what we know. When the fitness landscape it increases dimensions, it is very difficult to handle, because you would ultimately be only able to judge the fitness out of a very small part of the entire landscape. When the landscape increases dimensions, you test a still smaller probability of it. You test a still smaller fraction of it. and as a result, you know about a considerably less portion of the fitness landscape. Most of it is unidentified, and that may yield in the the algorithm getting converged into some kind of local optima in place of a global optima. So again, there's some kind of loss of dimensionality to the optimization problems as well, and therefore we need to control in the total dimension of the search space, and in this case it would result to we would need to control in the total size that our algorithm has. We would need to control the total size of the algorithm, or we would need to control the total size of this program. Now there are multiple things that I may do in order to control this size. The first and the very simple to do is known as a parsimony. Parsimony, it just states that I need to avoid in very large codes. So in order to avoid this, what I do is that I try to use evolutionary pressures. I try to use an evolutionary pressures such that they prohibit the codes getting very complex. I try to use an evolutionary pressures such that the evolutionary pressures, they prohibit programs having very high code, and if I have to use some evolutionary pressures, I'll definitely have to either change in the evolutionary operators or the fitness landscape. So what I do is that I try to modify the fitness landscape, or in this case the fitness function, such that they avoid very large codes. So let me say that the program that I evolved was Gx. The program that I evolved was Gx. Its value in solving the code was something like this. This is that my conventional fitness is. My conventional fitness is nothing but how well it is able to solve this problem. But in this case, what I do is that I decrease in some amount of fitness that is directly proportional to the length of the code. I reduce some amount that is directly proportional to the length of the code. The length for this case may easily be represented as the height of this tree. Sometimes may also be referred by the number of nodes of the tree, depending upon whether I am trying to control the height or some other parameter. But I apply in a penalty. I apply in a penalty, and codes having very large size, the codes having very large size, what would ultimately happen is, because the size is large, alpha is constant, referred to as the penalty constant, or sometimes as the parsimony constant. This number becomes very high. So for codes having very large size, they have got a very large penalty, and as a result, even though they may have a very good value of the fitness, they may have very good value in solving the problem, but the overall fitness is given to be low, only because they had in a good penalty being added. Now, one thing that is analogous to the overfitting of the neural network is that whenever I've got a lot of space to work with, I may accidentally write down very complex program that ultimately solve the problem well. So normally the addition of nodes, they might result in the fitness function taking good values, but we need to avoid them only because it might be the case of convergence to a local minima, and once it has got converged to a local minima in this complex landscape, we can never escape. So therefore we avoid all these things where the dimensionality it increases and we apply this penalty. This penalty would always be active when we go from a tree of height 2 to a tree of height 3 and a tree of height 4. This penalty would be even more active. Would even be active there. It will try to reduce the fitness value. But here what would happen is that if I go from a height 2 to a height 3, there's an abundance of fitness increase. There's an abundance of fitness increase. The fitness increases like anything. It's just like saying that I gave you a program and I said that you've got only 5 lines in which you have to write down this program, and the program was very complex. You will not be able to write down, you may not be able to solve all the problems with it. But if I increase these 5 lines to 10 lines, now you have got sufficient space, you can add addition loops and all, so you will be able to effectively solve the problem. So 5 lines to 10 lines is important. By addition of only relaxation of these 5 lines, the number of problems that you solve would increase incredibly. The number of test cases that you clear would increase incredibly. So normally towards the starting it means that in addition of nodes it means that incredible increase in fitness value, and that makes this term very, very small. But suppose you already had 1,000 lines with you and I gave you 1,010 lines. If you already had 1,000 lines, I gave you 10 more lines, now there's less that you can do. If you had something good, you would have done it in those 1,000 lines only. So you may of course write on something that clears a couple of cases more. So towards the end, the fitness length increase is very, very small. Towards the end, I got a very, very near increase in the fitness value, but the increase in penalty is large. The increase in penalty is large, and therefore when it comes to 1,010 lines with a better fitness value to 1,000 with clear more number of test cases to a code of 1,000 lines, clear lesser number of cases, I'll prefer 1,000, because the overall fitness of the 1,000 line code would be low. The 1,000 line code would be high. The 1,000 line code will have a higher fitness value, but again when it comes to 10 and 15, my 10 lines of code could hardly solve the problems, and fitness value would be very low. My 15 line code could solve most of the problem. So that's why the penalty will be more or less passive in nature, it will not contribute much. So I've got the trade-off between these two parameters. One is the fitness and the other is the code length. And parsimony is the first principle by which we try to maintain the fitness value. Parsimony is the first means by which we try to control in the code length, the maximum length that my code can attain, the maximum length that my program can attain. The other that is sometimes applied is called as an architecture alternate. It's just a general principle that states is that whenever you got codes that are large in size, whenever you got codes large in size, can you alter the architecture in such a way that keeping almost the same effectiveness, the code length reduces. So this is normally a difficult operator to code, that I need to analyze the complete syntax, the grammar, identify regions that I can alter, and based on any principle, based on any guidelines, I try to alter the program architecture. I try to alter the program architecture such that the altered architecture is smaller in size, such that the altered architecture leads me to a smaller length code, a smaller length tree, and since the tree is small, then I can effectively optimize. So there is some kind of architecture altering that is also done. The third is known as parametric modifications. The third is known as parametric modification. In parametric modification, all that we do is, that the generation of code in agentic programming that is controlled by some parameters like a mutation rate, a crossover rate, and so many parameters that your custom built agentic programming code would have. We try to control these parameters, we try to adapt these parameters in such a way such that they try to promote in programs with smaller code length, they try to reduce operations that ultimately lead to larger code lengths. So that is what we do over here. We try that the code length is as small as possible. We try that the codes are concise, they are small, by modification of these parameters. So again we are using some kind of evolutionary pressures. We are modifying the evolutionary pressures such that the smaller codes are encouraged, and evolution is more likely to go towards places that yields larger code length by modification of these parameters that ultimately modify the evolutionary pressures we try to obtain in smaller and compact codes. So this is where what we deal with the basic genetic programming. We discussed the basic algorithm, we discussed the operators, we've done some kind of convergence analysis, and we've seen some kind of code length control. We'll continue the discussion over the genetic programming. The next topic that we take is again an inspiration from the normal codes that we write. Again, it's an inspiration from the normal codes that we all write, that we all encounter in our everyday programming, and therefore we need to add these things up, these motivations up when it comes towards the genetic programming as well. And that is about generating reasonably complex codes. How do I do that? One of the obvious things to say would be that if I ever need to generate in some really complex codes, forget about the code length, let the code length grow as it is. Let it grow as it is. Let the tree become really complex in size, let it grow, and as a result, because the tree is large in size, it will generate a really complex program. And because it will generate a complex program, it will be able to solve in complex problems. But when we do that, of course, because of the dimensionality problem that we discussed multiple times in this lecture series, what will eventually happen out is convergence to a local optima, or sometimes also may be referred to as in this genetic programming that we are solving simple problems by very complex manner. So in place of 5, I write down 1 plus minus 1 plus 2 and so on. I am trying to solve a very simple problem by a complex manner. So if I am given a complex problem, leaving the code length grow as it is, it might result in generating complex codes that only solve a minute part of the problem. Now, since this is not how we are supposed to solve the problem of generating reasonably complex code, so we need to devise in some mechanism. We need to devise in some mechanism by which we will be able to handle out this phenomena. And that is what we will be dealing with two techniques over here. The first is called as automatically defined functions. And the second is known as emergent library builder. So we'll deal up briefly with both these techniques one by one, and we'll mainly try to see an inspiration how these techniques work. One is called as automatically defined functions, and the other is called as the emergent library builder. Now, the first technique that I have, the automatically defined functions, it has its analogy towards the use of subroutines. It has its analogy towards the use of subroutines inside my program that I write using any of these programming languages. Normally what happens is that I define some subroutines, I define some functions that provide me some functionality. All these subroutines, all these programs take in some inputs, they process these inputs and they return me some outputs. All these programs, they take these inputs, they process them to produce the output, and what happens is that these subroutines may not be used once in my entire program, they may be used multiple times. They may be used multiple times in the entire program at different kinds of places. Now in automatically defined functions, what happens is that we try to use the same analogy in which I say that can my program have some subroutines? Can it have some sub-functions? Can it have some sub-functions that are maybe called from my main program multiple times? My main program, that is the genetic individual. Can it be called from my main program or the genetic individual multiple number of times and my problem is solved. Now what these subroutines do is that it is well known that these subroutines make my main function very small. So if I have got some multiple subroutines within, my main function would become very small because more or less I am calling up these subroutines. So while I have all these subroutines and I am writing down the main program, my task becomes more or less very simple in nature. It becomes very simple in nature, and that simplicity ultimately yields me, it gives me a very powerful tool to write down very good codes, very small codes, very complex codes with nothing less than a few lines. So that is the same property that I am trying to use in the automatically defined functions, the ADFs. Now again, one thing to note is that these subroutines, they always try to exploit the program modularity. And that's again a term well used in software engineering, where we try to find out modularity, we try to find out repeating codes that have got no correlation with the main code, providing completely important but completely separate functionality from the main code, and that can be used from the main code. So they exploit in some kind of modularity, and that is what I will be exactly doing on the automatically defined functions. So let me say this was my tree out over here, and actually had some good kind of nodes. All I do is that I state is that can I extract out some part of this code and say that this is nothing but a function, so that this entire node may be replaced by a function f. Can I extract out this code and replace it by some function f? The extraction would be, of course, based on my analysis of modularity. It would be based on some analysis of modularity, and then what can happen is that into my actual program, after it has evolved quite many generations, I have got multiple existences of this f. So multiple times I am trying to call out this submodule. And of course, there are many programs that are there in this population pool. They all try to call this function multiple times. So my first task is extracting some kind of modularity. I need to identify some submodule. I need to extract out some subroutine, and this subroutine needs to provide in some good functionality. It needs to provide in some good functionality because in our everyday programming we use numerous libraries. Not all the subroutines given by those libraries are used. Only some of the useful ones are used. The ones that provide an everyday needs, they are used. And similarly here, that we need to identify good subroutines. A subroutine will be good only if it does some kind of computation that is good and relevant to the program in respect to the problem that is for solving. So we identify all these subroutines and we extract them out and we try to see if we can call in them multiple times. So that is what is known as the automatically defined function, and inspiration from the subroutine into the main context. We will look into the other part of it, the emergent library builder. One of its implementations is called as the GLib, the Genetic Emergent Library Builder. Here again we try to control the code length. Here it is again that we try to control out the code length. And how do we control out the code length in this case? Here we try to either control the code height or the code width. So there are two ways in which I can apply this library builder. Is that if I do some kind of code height control or some kind of leaf control, so suppose I have in a complex program, it had already given in a complex shape, Let me say it was something like this, where I got this as A, B, C, D, E, F. I got this as G, H. I got this as I over here, and P over here, a Q over here, and an R over here. Let me say that this was a program. I say my maximum height would be this. My maximum height would be this. So the first thing that I need to do when I'm trying to control the height, the first thing I need to do is some kind of compression. I need to do some kind of compression here. So all that I do is that I study this part of the code, I take this part of the code and I say this is nothing but A dash. I replace this entire code by code A dash. And when I do that A dash, look at what are the children of this code A. It is B over here, F over here. There is a node over here. There is a C over here. There is a D over here. There is a G over here. There is an I over here. There is a Q over here. H and G over here. So all this got replaced by A. A had one child B, one child C, one child I, one child Q. A had 4 children. A had 4 children, and these were the 4 children, and all these subroutines follow. So based on that, what I have done is that I have used the term A dash, and I have replaced this entire code by A dash. Now what evolves is this individual, and A dash is intact. Now this evolves and A dash is intact. It's known that this functionality is already there into this code. It is known that A dash, the functionality is already there in this code. So what do I do as my second thing is that I make in a library. That's why we call it an emergent library builder. I say that my A dash is nothing but this architecture out here. This is my A dash. So I had in the program that was getting very complex. I applied some kind of height control over this program. I applied some kind of good height control over this program, wherein I said that the top height. Now this H is quite large, so this architecture is actually quite complex. That is stored in my library as A dash, and all this code gets replaced by A dash with the children as these nodes. B, C, H and B, C, I and Q. Now this evolves, and this stage of converting this to this is known as compression. It's known as a code compression. Now whenever I need to get my actual program, whenever I need to get my full program, I'll have to move from here to here using this library. Using this library, I'll have to go from this and here, where A dash will be replaced by this node, and this node is known as the code expansion. So there is a code compression and there is a code expansion. Based on that, I always develop a library. This is only the contribution of one program. Like this, I have multiple programs that I'll try to contract. So my library will have in multiple entries coming out from different programs. Now of course, A dash correspondent to this in some program like this. A dash might again be the occurrence in 10 different programs. So all 10 of them will make it a common A dash over here. They'll make it a common A dash over here. And that is why I have a common library of all population pools. Of the entire population pool, I built a common library. And this library stores nothing but good subroutines, good programs that are taken intact, and the rest of the evolution that follows. This is a common library built by all the various programs. A dash might exist in some 10 or 15 odd individuals. Some other individuals in the population might contribute a B dash and so on. So based on that, I have kind of done some kind of code control. I kind of control the height to some level. I control it to some position. I control it up by some degree. The other way of controlling the code length is exactly the similar, except for in place of height we use leaves. It is exactly the same, except for in height we use the leaves. So all the compression, the expansion and the lively building, the concept is same, the way in which we do is different. So here if I have got this node over here, a program like this, on which we need to control the height. If I had this as a program, I now say let this be represented by A dash. So if this was A, this was B, this was C, this was E, this was F, this was G, this was H, I'll have in a code like this. And this entire tree would have its own evolution. So this gets A dash. So I'm trying to leave out the leaves, and based on that I'm trying to control the core part of it. I'm trying to control the core part of the tree, leaving the leaves. Again, this is what be the contraction space. A dash would, this architecture as it is would go towards the library, and towards the end we will have some kind of expansion phase where I needed the complete program. Suppose at any time I need out the complete program, I'll have some kind of expansion step. So in this mechanism, it can be argued that we'll be able to nicely generate some good codes. We'll be nicely able to generate some good programs. We'll be nicely able to generate out some good architectures of the tree or some good architecture of the program, that exploiting some intrinsic features of modularity, that exploiting some intrinsic features of convergence would ultimately yield in far more optimal solutions that in this complex landscape. Now whenever I use the term landscape, it's not necessarily a landscape, it's rather a very complex tree structure. In this complex tree structure, they would be able to restrict out the dimensionality, they would be able to restrict out the combinations possible, and they in turn would be able to generate in good codes and neat codes. So that is some kind of functionality that I am adding when I use the automatically defined functions as well as the emergent library builder, one implementation we call as genetic library builder. So that is what the entire paradigm of the genetic programming is all about. Of course, genetic programming is able to do a lot. We evolve neural networks using this genetic programming, wherein we give in a grammar, and that is almost like writing down a code of the neural network, the code not being a C code but rather being a neural code, in which the nodes are modeled in some way, in which the weights and biases are modeled in some way, and they keep on developing in this, as per this genetic programming grammar. We evolve machines out of it. We write down some grammar, we write down some rules, we write down some syntax, based on which the complete evolution of a machine is guided, and the machine is ultimately represented as a program, and using this program we solve the problems. We've got complete intelligent systems that we evolved using this concept of genetic programming. Again, because genetic programming has got a lot of flexibility, we can generate some different kinds of machines, different kinds of systems. We can generate in some very nice kinds of programs to solve the problem, and that is where some real life applications we are solving using this property of the genetic programming. The basics of genetic programming again like same on the principles of genetic algorithms, where we've got standard genetic operators that apply over a tree-based architecture over here, yielding the high generation from the low generation. And the in terms of a fitness landscape, if you study, it would more or less come out to be the conventional convergence, where the fitness is plotted against the generations. So this is where the individuals have all converged. This is what is the mutation is controlling. Here they are different kinds of fitness degrees. This is what would be the scene of a fitness landscape in terms of genetic programming as well, exactly as we saw in genetic algorithms. Now, one of the problems with the genetic programming is, one of the major problems of genetic programming is that we need a very complex structure. That's a tree-based structure in which this evolution happens. So that means a lot of intelligent coding, that means a lot of good programming practices. They are ways in which we can make this structure linear. There are ways in which we can make this twist exactly performed in the similar way, exactly what the program, but represented in a linear fashion. And I know what is the use of a linear fashion, that most of the principles of the genetic algorithms, the simple genetic algorithm would be copied as it is. They may be taken as it is. That is when we got the linear representation of the genetic programming. That is done using the grammatical evolution. And grammatical evolution is exactly what we'll study in the next hour of the talk. We will focus more about the grammatical evolution and how is it able to overcome these limitations and provide an paradigm as well.